One day in 1926, in a plantation field, it was seen that black workers were busy taking care of the fields belonging to white people. Among them there was a small family who always worked together happily every day, the son named Cecil. And that afternoon while working, suddenly the son of the owner of the garden came to bring Cecil's mother to the warehouse. The father could only stare at his wife being raped. He kept trying to calm little Cecil while saying, "If this world is the world of white people, we black people have no right to fight." It wasn't long before the garden owner's son came out of the barn. Cecil's father called and looked at him with anger. Even those eyes made the garden owner's son offended. Then, the father was shot dead in front of the eyes of little Cecil. Cecil could only cry without knowing what to do. The garden owner, who heard the gunshots, came, then ordered the other workers to bury Cecil's father's body. Out of pity, Grandma decided to take care of, educate and give Cecil a job as a maid in the house. The next day, Grandma started teaching Cecil how to be a good servant. Starting from giving the dish from the right, there should be no sound at all. When placing a glass or plate, the sound of breathing should not be heard, as well as many other lessons. For years Cecil worked and grew there, until one day, Cecil decided to leave. He then said goodbye to his mother. Since the first rape incident, Cecil's mother had gone crazy. Although sad to have to leave his mother to be cared for by other fellow workers, Cecil is sure that his mother will agree if he goes abroad to get a better life. When he said goodbye to Grandma, Grandma was very sad because she considered Cecil like her own grandson. This was Cecil's first time leaving the plantation area towards the city. During the journey, he saw many cruelties that were far more severe. No one wants to give shelter, racism is everywhere, even white people are free to kill black people on the streets without receiving punishment. At that time, the law was not at all in favor of black people, but the law was created to punish black people. In the city, Cecil was so hungry that he was desperate to steal food. Lucky. The shop assistant who caught Cecil was a good person. Instead of punishing him, he treated his hands, and even gave Cecil a job as a waiter.
They want a principal. Perfect.
There came a day, where the butler told me that he got a job offer to be a waiter at a 5-star luxury hotel in the city of Washington. But because he felt too old, the butler told Cecil to go to their place. He also advised young Cecil that a servant has two faces. The first face is his real face, while the second face is the face shown when serving white people. He advised that no matter how luxurious or difficult Cecil's life may be, we should not lose our true face. In 1957, Cecil started working there, for many years as a hotel waiter. Now looks to have become a grown man who is good at capturing the hearts of white guests. He is also married to a woman named Gloria, and has two sons, namely Louis and Charlie. Cecil in the city of Washington has changed 180 degrees, even though his salary is not too big, but he is good at managing finances so that he can buy a car, a house, and even send his two children to excellent schools. That morning when he was gathering with his family, suddenly Cecil got a call from the butler of the presidential White House. Cecil was invited to come there. The next day, with a happy face, Cecil went to the White House to meet the butler who called him yesterday. The butler explained that Cecil's name was quite famous as the best waiter among important guests who often visited the hotel where he worked. That's why he offered Cecil a job to dedicate his life be a servant to the president. Hearing the offer, Cecil was very happy, and without a second thought, he immediately agreed. The next morning, Cecil's job as a White House servant begins. The first day the butler taught the code of ethics in serving state officials. Cecil was sworn to only focus on serving and should not see or hear anything. Then for the first time in his life, Cecil nervously made and delivered tea to the President's Room America. Inside, it turns out that there is a meeting discussing racism in the Arkansas region. Cecil can only silently obey the code of ethics as if he didn't see or hear anything. A few days later, after his first child named Louis graduated from high school, Cecil and his family took Louis to the bus stop to continue his education outside the city. After months of working in the White House, Dwight's presidential term was coming to an end. When Cecil and other waiters were baking cake, the vice president came to visit them. The vice president named Nixon turned out to be running as a presidential candidate in the next election. Now Nixon is on campaign and asks Cecil and the other servants to support him. Nixon also asked the three of them to help persuade people in the black community, while promising that if he won the next election, he would make black people's lives more prosperous. On the other hand, Louis has started to carry out his activities as a student. He accidentally met and became acquainted with a woman named Carl. Carl then invites Louis into a hidden discussion class where activists gather. They discuss plans for a demonstration or protest against white people. Their goal is only for black people to be treated equally. Several days passed, after discussion of designing plans, mentally training, and determining locations. The day came when they all started their first demo. In a cafe, Louis and the others sat on a white bench. The waiter then ordered to move to a black seat, but they refused, and sat still demanding equality.
Get up, monkey! What is this? You reading this? What disrespect.
Saw the incident on TV news. Cecil rushes off to see his son imprisoned. He is furious at Louis. All this time Cecil had worked hard to pay for the needs of the family, including Louis's tuition fees, in the hope that his son could live decently one day, but instead of studying hard, Louis joined the demonstrators. Not only Louis, because Cecil was too busy at work, he had abandoned Gloria, so Gloria was lonely and now drank a lot. In 1961, Kennedy was sworn in as the new President of the United States. Kennedy managed to win the election against Nixon. All the servants lined up to welcome their new president. 1 month later, Louis was free. The whole group of activists boarded the special bus that would take them home. At first everything seemed calm, but on the way, they were confronted by a group of racist organizations called KKK. Because they did not have time to turn back, their bus was attacked. Luckily, in last night's attack incident, Louis and his friends managed to survive. KKK only beat and blew up their bus, but even though the group of black people were victims, the police actually arrested them all because they were considered rioters. In fact, they were detained longer than before. Some time passed. Since being released, the activists did not give up and continued to protest without stopping, even with increasing numbers. The demonstrations continued for years until one afternoon President Kennedy looked exhausted from the demonstration after demonstration. When Cecil came in, President Kennedy said that he already knew Cecil's son, Louis, also joined the demonstration. The president also informed that Louis is currently in prison along with the leader of the activist, Martin Luther King. 16 times. Hearing the news just now, Cecil apologized if his son had made a mess. He himself had not seen Louis in a very long time. When Cecil wanted to leave, President Kennedy said that the activists were not chaos makers, but they were heroes who succeeded in changing people's hearts and also succeeded in changing the hearts of President Kennedy. The next day, for the first time in the history of the United States, there was finally a president who dared to make a big revolution to defend the rights of black people. But before he could carry out the all-racial equality revolution, President John Kennedy was assassinated. The president is shot in the head by a mysterious sniper while driving a car. Knowing the news, Cecil's and all black people's hearts were broken. Cecil's kitchen could only cry and slump down. When he entered the president's room, the wife was still crying. Crying in shock because in the car she saw her husband's head exploded by a bullet right beside him. Arriving at home, Cecil conveyed the sad news earlier, even though she was sad, but Gloria didn't care. She cared more about the condition of the family at home, which was a mess because Cecil was too busy working. Entering the room, while tidying the tie as a memento of President Kennedy's last gift, Cecil realized that he had abandoned his family all along. Since that night, Cecil and Gloria also decided to change. Cecil was spending more time with his family, while Gloria had also stopped drinking. Now the head of government has changed to Johnson as the 36th President of the United States. While cleaning up his office, President Johnson suddenly gave Cecil a pin. It was a pin award for the best presidential servant. In the evening, Cecil invites his friends to gather to celebrate the award. At the party, they all talk about the government of President Johnson, which is very different from Kennedy. During Johnson's presidency, black racism was getting worse, and Kennedy's idea of revolution was never continued. As a result, massive riots occurred throughout the United States to demand President Johnson to immediately proceed with the Kennedy Revolution plan. But President Johnson actually dispersed the demonstrators brutally, police gunfire everywhere, until that day was referred to as Bloody Sunday. In the afternoon, while taking a break, Cecil ventured into the room of the White House Chief of Staff named Warner, where he said that he wanted the salaries of black workers to be equal to white workers. So, today the salary of black workers is far below that of white workers just because of the difference in skin color. But Warner instead told Cecil to thank him for being given the opportunity to work here. If he still didn't accept it, then he would fire him. Disappointed, Cecil left from there. A few days later, while Gloria was sewing, she was shocked to see that Louis, who had been missing for years, had finally come home. At night, Louis invites his girlfriend to dinner at home. There Cecil tried to stay calm and restrained his anger even though there was a rebellious child in front of him. However, because of Louis' impudent attitude and speech, over time, his father's anger exploded.
Get the hell out of my house! I'm sorry, Mr. Butler. I didn't mean to make fun of your hero.
Get out of this house.
In 1969, Johnson's presidential term ended. He was replaced by Nixon, who ran for president again, and this time managed to win. Unfortunately, Nixon's sweet promise during the campaign to make black people's lives more prosperous was never fulfilled. During the reign of President Nixon, this is United States war against Vietnam for no apparent reason. On the other hand, Louis was again jailed for demonstrations. That night, Louis's younger brother Charlie visited the prison. Charlie informed him that he had signed up for the United States military to join the war against Vietnam to defend the country. Knowing that his beloved brother had been devoured by the government's propaganda of nationalism, Louis immediately objected. He was afraid that his little brother would die on the battlefield just because of the words of defending the country. But Charlie's decision was unanimous. He would still defend the country by going to war in Vietnam. A few months after Charlie left, Gloria makes a surprise birthday party for Cecil. After changing clothes, suddenly 2 United States soldiers come and deliver the news that Charlie died on the battlefield. On this supposedly happy birthday, the family was filled with sadness. The next morning at Charlie's funeral, all of Cecil's family members arrive, except for Louis. Since the defeat of United States war in Vietnam, the entire community and members of the council have been constantly pushing President Nixon into resigning, causing him stress. President Nixon was always drunk every day. When Cecil came in to deliver drinks, Nixon asked if he had failed as president. Cecil did not want to answer the question, because he was more disappointed that the president never kept his promises during the campaign. In the kitchen, Louis came just to say that he has now graduated from college. Cecil there was not proud at all. He even kicked Louis out, saying, "An older brother who doesn't come to his sister's funeral is not worth being proud of." Year after year passed. Many times the presidents of United States changed, until in 1986 Ronald Reagan also led United States. First year in office, Reagan asked Cecil to pass on a secret message to someone. In the afternoon, Cecil went back to see Warner. There he again begged for the salary of black workers to be increased. It didn't need to be too high, just equated with white workers, because he's been working there for 20 years but never had a raise. Again Warner's answer was condescending. He even fired Cecil that very second. Hearing the dismissal just now, Cecil smiled. He then conveyed a secret message from President Reagan, a message that Warner was fired because he had been proven to have withheld the rights of the presidential staff. With a sigh of relief Cecil left the room, and since then the salaries of all the black staff in the White Building went up. Week after week passed. While at work, President Reagan's wife called out in awe of Cecil's dedication to becoming the best servant in the White House. The First Lady invited Cecil and his wife to an important party tonight. Not as a servant, but as a special guest of the president. That night, Cecil and Gloria came. At first they both looked very happy in their lives. They had never felt a party as luxurious as this, but over time in the middle of the party, Cecil was silent. The old servant's heart felt empty. At home, he continued to stare at Louis's photo. Cecil had just realized that in 20 years working as a presidential servant, he had never once spent time with his children. Unknowingly the years seemed to pass so fast. Now Cecil felt it was time to stop. Cecil then conveyed his wish to the president. The president was surprised that his best servant stopped. But after all the president could not hold it in. With a heavy heart he let go of the servant. The next day, while Louis was leading activists in a demonstration demanding that Nelson Mandela be released, he saw his father coming from a distance. Louis stopped the speech, then approached Cecil and asked why he came there. Cecil replied that he wanted to join the demonstration with his son. Louis was shocked. He was afraid that if his father dared to join the demonstration, Cecil could be arrested by the police. Louis was worried, what if Cecil lost his job? Hearing that, the father replied, "I've been missing you all this time."
Sorry.
Yup, Cecil is really in jail. After experiencing himself in bars, Cecil's view of the demonstrators changed. He finally realized the people there were not bad boys. The demonstrators were a group of people who united their voices to make big changes. 22 years later, Cecil and Gloria look very old. Louis is also married and has one daughter. One morning, after breakfast, Cecil went to the bathroom, but when he came back he saw that his beloved wife had died. Again Cecil had to lose someone he loved. At night, in 2008, on November 4, 2008, when Louis was looking at his mother and sister's photo album, suddenly his father shouted for Louis. Down there, Cecil was watching TV news with teary eyes. The old man finally saw the election of the first black president in United States history. Namely, Barack Obama.
Cannot project that Barack Obama, who still wonders if the dream of our founder of our democracy.
In 2009, after being officially sworn in as president, Obama invited Cecil to the White House to tell the story of his journey in serving 7 United States presidents. Before leaving, Cecil was seen tidying up the tie that was given to President Kennedy as well as his award pin. When he arrived at the White House, he was greeted by a young butler who conveyed the message that President Obama was waiting for him. When the young servant wanted to show the way to the president's room, proudly, Cecil said, "He can do it himself, he knows the whole way in this building."